Benjamin, I just saw Avengers Endgame and I really want to talk about it. So if you haven't seen it, then, I don't know, do something else? Go outside. No, listen to our podcast and go outside. Please? 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 Okay, so obviously, spoilers from here on out. Do I have a graphic for spoilers? That'll do. Now it's time for me to reveal the true title of this video. Does Avengers Endgame's time travel plot make sense? Short answer, yes! Let me explain. In fiction, there are really only 3 types of time travel. You can have a static timeline, a dynamic timeline, or a multiverse. Every story with time travel fits into one of these 3 categories. The specific rules can vary, but the overall structure is only ever one of these 3 things. Trust me, I'm not wrong about this. I'm a white guy sitting in his bedroom talking about a comic book movie. Oh God. Oh my God. So whenever you come across time travel in a story, it's usually going to fall into one of these 3 categories. Once you know that, you can start examining the rules and see if they make logical sense. So let me explain how each theory of time travel works, and then we can move from there. Cool?
So cool.
In a static timeline, going back in time and changing something does not affect the future. Attempts to change events usually results in those events happening anyway. For example, if you were to go back in time and try to kill your grandfather, you would fail. Maybe your grandfather would punch you in the face and then wrestle the gun away from you and then lock you in a basement for the rest of your life. I don't know what your grandfather's up to. Or maybe the gun would jam and you would just run away. Or maybe you would successfully kill him and then you would become your grandfather, making your family tree some sort of weird loop. Or maybe someone else is actually your grandfather and you just never knew, or any other number of things. The universe has already accounted for you going back in time and attempting to kill your grandfather. By coming back, you only fulfill the script that has already been written. In a static timeline, paradoxes are impossible. Examples include Predestination, the first season of Red vs. Blue, Bill and Ted, The Time Traveler's Wife, 12 Monkeys, and Harry Potter. In a dynamic timeline, changes to the past directly affect the future. This results in the original timeline being lost and the consequences of your actions perpetuating into the future. This is usually what people think of when they think of time travel. An example, if you were to go back in time and kill your grandfather, you would succeed and then be promptly erased, but not necessarily from history. In a dynamic timeline, paradoxes can occur. So if you were to go back in time and kill your grandfather, then you would be erased, and then he would not be killed by you, and then he would sire your father, who would sire you. Yeah. Dynamic timelines have some weird implications. In some dynamic timelines, changes in the past affect the future immediately. Erasing people in front of your eyes, or changing their memories, or destroying their anatomy, or changing the structures of things. This sort of implies that the past, present, and future all exist at the same time, or at least our perception of time is completely incorrect. See Slaughterhouse-5. In some dynamic timelines, there is a delay between when a change occurs and when it actually settles in. See Legends of Tomorrow or Back to the Future. In some cases, these changes take place immediately. See Looper. Examples of dynamic timelines besides the ones I've just mentioned include Terminator, Hot Tub Time Machine, The Flash, Jumanji, and Primer. In both a dynamic timeline and a static timeline, there exists only one timeline, or at least your time machine can only go forward or backward. In a multiverse, when you go back in time and make a change, you create a new timeline which branches off from the old timeline. The results of both timelines, one where you made the change and one where you did not, play out to infinity. However, both exist at the same time. If you were to go back in time and kill your grandfather, you would succeed, but then live in a universe where your grandfather was killed prematurely. If you were to travel forward in time, you would discover the future of the timeline that you created. You would not return to the original timeline that you left. paradoxes are also impossible in multiverses. The implication here is that in a multiverse, time isn't a line. It's two-dimensional or maybe even three-dimensional, which means you could potentially jump from timeline to timeline, but not with a time machine that only moves in one dimension. Real quick, humans exist in 4 dimensions, 3 dimensions of space and 1 dimension of time. Think of a dimension as a direction. Height, length, width, duration. These are all dimensions that we deal with literally all the time. A multiverse implies a new direction to move in, perpendicular to your timeline. If you can move from timeline to timeline, then you are moving in a new direction, a 5th dimension. A feature that is often present in multiverse stories is the action of going back in time is enough to create a new timeline. Simply existing, even briefly, can have unpredictable or catastrophic effects on the future. If your time machine can only travel forward or backward, then when you go back, you cannot return to the timeline you left. You'll forever be doomed to zigzag across the 5th dimension, never able to return home. But if your time machine can jump sideways between parallel universes, then it's all good, fam. Because then you can move back to the timeline that you came from, leaving the timeline you changed in your past. Examples of multiverses in fiction include The Time Ships by Stephen Baxter, and by extension, The Time Machine by H.G. Wells, The Butterfly Effect, Sliding Doors, Donnie Darko, Star Trek, and of course, Avengers Endgame. There is quite a bit of evidence for this. See, when the Avengers travel back in time, they change the past, but they also create new timelines. You see a hint of this when Bruce confronts Tilda Swinton on the rooftop of the Sanctum. She says she has a duty to protect her own reality, and Bruce is from a different reality. But when they return to the future, they are not in the universe they've just changed. We never see what the other universe looked like, or what the consequences were of, say, Loki escaping with the Space Stone, or Quill never getting the Power Stone. I mean, he certainly never met Gamora. The Gamora from his timeline jumped forward into the primary timeline. Another small hint is when they're traveling through the quantum realm, you can see them choosing tunnels or choosing paths. Maybe they're not just choosing specific moments, but specific timelines. It may even be likely that when the Avengers travel back in time, they travel back to different timelines. You can clearly see Loki locked up in Asgard during the events of Thor 2. But why would he be there if he had just escaped New York after being defeated? If this is multiverse, then it makes perfect sense. When Thor travels back in time, he splinters the timeline, but so did Iron Man and Cap when they traveled back in time. Likewise, killing Thanos at the end does not affect the last 5 years, nor do any of the other inconsistencies come to pass by changing the past. This heavily hints at a multiverse. Plus, pay close attention to the language they use in this movie. First of all, they call Back to the Future a bunch of bull, which from a time travel standpoint, I completely agree with. Awesome movie, but the time travel makes no sense. Bruce says your past becomes your new future, and what was your future becomes your past, or something like that. Essentially, it boils down to when you go back in time, you create an alternate timeline, one that does not affect the future, or the present. Finally, at the very end, Bruce tells Cap that he needs to put the stones back in order to prevent some nasty alternative realities. Cap says that he will clip the branches. Only multiverses have alternative realities or branch timelines. Therefore, the only problem with this theory is old Steve Rogers, but I have an answer that is not supported by the text, but not contradicted either. I think that after he goes back in time and sets everything right, he travels back in time one more time, but this time going back to the original timeline, the one that we follow for most of the MCU. And then he lives out his life and ends up right where he ends up at the end of the movie. So, assuming all this is right, here is what the timeline looks like for Endgame. Okay, so first we'll draw the original timeline. And here is the snap. Okay, this is the events of Avengers Infinity War right here. This will not be to scale, don't worry. Keep things consistent. So the movies, the events in time that are important to us are thus. Here you have Avengers 1, Thor 2, and we've got Guardians of the Galaxy. So Cap and Tony, I'm gonna make red. So call it Iron Man and Cap. This is Endgame. So this is during the events of Endgame. Iron Man and Cap go back in time to Avengers 1. When they do that, they create a separate timeline. One where Loki escapes. Go all the way down here. I'm going to use pink to denote Ant-Man. Ant-Man goes back in time with Tony and Cap to Avengers 1. Okay? So during this time, as you know, since you've seen the movie, Ant-Man goes back. So he goes back to here. Then Cap and Iron Man go back to 1970. So they go back to here. So back here. Again, this is not to scale. So when they do that, they create another timeline. And from there, they move back to the events of Endgame. Because Thor and Rocket stay together the entire time, don't need to split them up. So they go from Endgame to Thor 2. And when they do that, they create another timeline. In this one, Thor steals his own hammer from himself. And then he and Rocket, after talking to Thor's mom, travel forward in time back to the original timeline. I don't know how to spell Rhodey, so I just looked it up. Nebula and Rhodey go back in time to the events of Guardians of the Galaxy 1. Here they are. Now, Rhodey successfully goes back here. Nebula meets up with Thanos, and they come back here. And Thanos, of course. Then they have their whole fight here, and then, Thanos is defeated for the second time. So also in here is Hawkeye and Black Widow, which I've actually run out of colors, but I can explain where they are. So they come from here with Nebula and Rhodey. They go from here back, and then just Hawkeye returns at the same time that Rhodey does to the future. And then at the end here, Captain America goes back, I'm assuming, so this is going to be Cap. And then to here, and then to here, and then to here. That's all. None of that's shown. You don't see any of that in the movie. All you see is him coming back and then eventually arriving, at the end here. The last step thing he does is goes from here back to here. So he's like, jumping over timelines, and he ends up back over there. It's very simple, I swear. You can see the black lines are the timelines. These are splinter timelines, right? None of these events in here that happens during this movie in the past affects the main timeline, right? So events back here, events in the past do not affect events in the future. And it's possible to put things, back in order somewhat. I don't know what the exact rules are, but I'm assuming that these timelines are a little bit different because of the changes that they went back in time and did. Although, because Cap put the Infinity Stones back, the results can't be too catastrophic. At least that's the theory. And in this timeline here, the Guardians of the Galaxy timeline, Quill never meets Gamora, because Gamora traveled in the future with her dad to our timeline. And also, there's no Thanos in that timeline. There is still a Thanos in this one, and this one, and in this one. Anyway, hope that makes everything easier. Oh, jeez. But by the laws of time travel and the multiverse theory, this all makes perfect sense. It's actually really surprising and really nice to see a movie follow some sort of consistent logic when it comes to time travel. It's just so easy to screw it up. Anyway, I hope that all makes sense. Let me know what you think. Benjamin, when I started this video, I told you that there are only 3 types of time travel stories. Yet, this video is an exercise in time travel that doesn't fit into any of those molds. Let me know if you see it. Anyway, I'll talk to you soon. Okay, one more thing. When Tony discovers the secrets of time travel, he describes it as inverted Mobius strip. Now, Mobius strips are super sweet shapes, but this is especially interesting when you're talking about time. Imagine if you were an ant walking along Mobius strip. You could take what appears to you to be a perfectly straight path, but you end up exactly where you started, having seen everything there is to see along the way. From your limited point of view, you walked perfectly straight, and yet you twisted and turned through extra dimensions to end up exactly where you began. Humans may exist in 4 dimensions, but we really only perceive 3. The past is only a memory, and the future is opaque. It may appear that we're moving in a direct path, but really we're twisting and turning through extra dimensions, and eventually we'll end up exactly where we began.